Q&A is about Spock's very first day on the Enterprise as an ensign. He seems very eager and excited, or at least as eager and excited as Vulcans typically allow themselves to get. Spock is greeted in the transporter room by Number 1, who, because she is so efficient, is dictating a memorandum into her pad as he arrives. She tells him to ask questions to the point where he becomes an annoyance. The first question he asks is her name, and she says to call her Number 1. In several Star Trek novels, of course, she is known as Una, but that was never used in any episode or movie until Captain Pike first called her that in the very last episode of the second season of Discovery. There's a shot of the inside of the turbolift system. I love when they do that because you can see that the turbolifts have shafts that can take them side to side as well as up and down. Although it looks like they're just moving through some kind of void, like where are all of the decks? Where's the rest of the ship? Number 1 apparently designed the ship's replicator's glucose matrix because it's called the Una matrix, but she discourages Spock from calling her that. Spock asks if she has ever considered whether the Prime Directive is ethical, and she advises that he not consider that for the sake of his own sanity. Which sounds to me like the writers telling the audience not to think about it too much. There are several really great episodes of Star Trek, though, that deal with the ethical implications of it. The original series episode, Private Little War, the Next Generation episode, Symbiosis, and my favorite is the Enterprise episode, Cogenitor. She sits on Spock's shoulders and opens the service hatch to try to fix the turbolift, and because she's very efficient, she tells Spock to continue asking questions while she inspects its components. She gets a nasty shock while doing this, which is a great illustration of how multitasking is really not the most productive way of getting things done. Spock runs out of questions, so Number 1 asks him about the fact that he was smiling when he beamed aboard the ship. She's surprised by this considering the fact that he's Vulcan, and she advises him to be conscientious about how he is perceived by other crew members, since he is aiming at command. Spock denies that this is his goal, but Number 1 doubts this given that he took a super hard quantum stochastic combat modeling course, which is apparently required for command positions. So was Spock lying, or is Number 1 simply mistaken? Spock does occasionally lie, but he usually excuses it by saying it wasn't technically a lie, it was an exaggeration, or it was merely an implication. Maybe Spock's not lying about wanting command. Maybe he's just in denial. Spock implies curiosity about Number 1's experience with hiding aspects of her personality, as she is advising Spock to do, and to illustrate her flamboyant side, she starts singing Gilbert and Sullivan. This episode left me with a lot of questions. They were mostly questions for the writers. It seems as though the way they've framed Number 1 is as though her personality is fake. She's stiff and Vulcan-y, so people see her as more authoritative. It's not the way she naturally is. I find that to be a rather disappointing revelation. And even though she tells Spock the importance of guarding expression of one's emotions and apparently any interest in fun from the rest of the crew, she shows off her real personality to Spock, an ensign she just met. And then of course tells him not to talk about it to anyone. Now we all know that Spock used to smile occasionally, and he laughs in this episode. He smiles in the cage, but I guess back then he was still working on how much to focus on logic and how much to allow himself to be emotional. And he decided to focus on logic after the events of the cage. Probably because of his experiences with Michael, and maybe he also remembered this advice from Number 1. Spock gets to the bridge, Number 1 pretends to forget his name, and when Pike asks him if Vulcans ever feel awe, Spock says that they do, but they tend to keep it to themselves.